The bridge of the ISS Defiant was barely holding together. Sparks flew from damaged consoles, and the smell of burned wiring filled the air. Captain Minho stood at the center of the chaos, his uniform torn and stained with blood that wasn't his own. Around him, his crew worked frantically to keep their dying ship alive. Ji-Wan sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across a cracked screen. The numbers she was seeing made her stomach turn. 300 enemy ships surrounded them. 300 massive warships, each one capable of destroying a planet. Against them stood only 50 human vessels, most of them damaged like the Defiant. It was the end of everything humanity had fought for. "Captain, they're hailing us again," said Hyan from the engineering station. The chief engineer looked exhausted. He had been working for 36 hours straight, keeping the ship from falling apart. His hands were covered in grease and minor burns. Minho nodded. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing the face of a Torvan admiral. The alien's face was covered in dark scales, and its eyes glowed with a cold blue light. When it spoke, its voice was like rocks grinding together. "Human vessel Defiant, this is your final warning. Surrender now or be destroyed. Your allies have already fled or submitted. You stand alone." It was true. The Vorathian Empire, with all their advanced energy weapons, had retreated 2 days ago. The Quellan Unity, who could read minds and coordinate perfectly in battle, had surrendered yesterday. Humanity's so-called allies had abandoned them when things got bad. Now the human fleet was trapped in Sector 7, surrounded by an enemy that wanted them dead or enslaved. "What do you say, Captain?" The Torvan admiral asked. "Will you surrender, or will you die pointlessly?" Minho looked around his bridge. He saw Sola, the medical officer, standing near the door. She had just come from sick bay, where dozens of wounded crew members were fighting for their lives. He saw Doyan at the weapons station, the young officer's jaw clenched with anger and frustration. He saw Hyan, who had kept this ship running through impossible conditions. He saw Ji-Wan, who had fought beside him for 5 years. "Give me 1 hour," Minho said to the Torvan admiral. The alien laughed, a harsh sound that made everyone on the bridge flinch. "1 hour, then. But know this, human. When that hour ends, if you have not surrendered, we will destroy every single one of your ships. Your species will be remembered as the foolish primitives who chose extinction over sense." The screen went black. Silence filled the bridge. It was the silence of defeat, of knowing that everything was lost. 50 ships against 300. Damaged ships with depleted ammunition against fresh warships with full arsenals. Human technology that was decades behind against quantum computers and plasma weapons. There was no logical path to victory. "Captain," Ji-Wan said quietly, "I need to show you something." Minho walked over to her station. She pulled up a scan of the asteroid field they were trapped in. The asteroids were large, jagged rocks that glowed with a faint crystalline light. "These aren't normal asteroids," she explained. "They're made of something called tetraburnium. It's a rare crystal that the Torvan consider worthless. They don't even mine it. Why should we care?" Dayan asked from his station. "We're about to die." Ji-Wan's eyes met Minho's. "Because humans used tetraburnium during the colony wars. We learned that when you shatter it in specific ways, it releases electromagnetic pulses. Massive ones. The kind that can fry every computer system within range." Hyan stood up from his station, suddenly interested. "How massive?" "Big enough to disable everything in this sector," Ji-Wan said. "Their ships, our ships, everything." "That's suicide," Doyan said. "If we disable our own ships, we're just floating targets." "Maybe not," Hyan said, walking over to join them. "Our ships are older. A lot of our systems are still mechanical, not fully computerized like Torvan ships. If we prepared manual overrides, if we stripped out the automated controls and went back to basics, we could reboot faster than they could. Minho felt something stir in his chest. It was a crazy idea. It was almost certainly going to fail. But it was better than just surrendering and hoping the Torvin would be merciful. They wouldn't be. Everyone knew what the Torvin did to species they conquered. How long would we have? Minho asked. Jiwan ran quick calculations on her damaged console. If we do this right, the electromagnetic storm would last about 10 minutes. Maybe 8. Their ships would start automated recovery after that. We would need to reboot our systems, get weapons online, and destroy them before they recovered. 8 minutes, Sola said from the doorway. 8 minutes to manually restart our ships, aim our weapons, and take out 300 enemy vessels. She shook her head. It's impossible. Everything we've done in the last month was impossible, Minho said. He thought about all the battles they had fought, all the times they should have died but didn't. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and the first contact with hostile aliens. They had survived because they never gave up, even when giving up was the smart choice. Contact the other ships, Minho ordered. Encrypted burst transmission. I want every captain on a private channel in 5 minutes. The next hour was chaos. Minho explained his plan to the other fleet commanders. Most of them thought he had lost his mind. Commander Yunji of the Resilience argued that surrender was the only way to save what was left of humanity. Captain Taiho of the Wanderer said the plan would kill them all faster than just fighting normally, but a few captains listened. A few saw what Minho saw, that dying while fighting for survival was better than living as slaves. One by one, they agreed. Not all of them. 10 ships refused and broke formation, trying to run. The Torvin destroyed them within minutes. The remaining 40 ships moved into position. On the Defiant, Hyon and his engineering teams worked like madmen. They ripped out automated systems and installed manual controls. They prepared mechanical overrides for life support, weapons, and engines. Sola prepared sick bay for the casualties that were coming. Dayan calibrated the railguns for precision shooting they were never designed for. Jiwan worked with tactical officers from every ship, calculating exact firing angles for 17 specific asteroids. Each shot had to be perfect. One mistake and the whole plan would fail. With 10 minutes left in the hour, Minho stood on his bridge and looked at his crew. They were tired, scared, and probably going to die. But they were ready. This is it, he said. The Torvin think we're primitives. They think our old ships and simple weapons make us weak. Let's show them what humans do when we're cornered. The hour ended. The Torvin admiral appeared on screen again, expecting surrender. Instead, Minho gave him humanity's oldest gesture of defiance. The alien's face twisted with rage. Destroy them all, the Torvin admiral ordered. Now, Minho said calmly, 40 human ships opened fire on 17 crystalline asteroids. The Battle of Sector 7 had begun. The first asteroid exploded in a shower of crystalline fragments. Each piece caught the light from nearby stars and reflected it in 1,000 different directions. It was beautiful for exactly 1 second. Then the electromagnetic pulse hit. Every light on the Defiant went dark. The bridge was suddenly silent, except for the sound of people breathing. Minho felt the ship shudder as main power died. Emergency lights flickered once, twice, then stayed on, casting everything in a dim red glow. Engineering report, Minho said into the darkness. Static answered him. The communication systems were dead. Of course they were. That was the whole point. Minho pushed himself out of his captain's chair and moved carefully across the tilted bridge. The gravity was failing, making everything feel strange and heavy. Down in the engineering section, Hyon was already moving. He had done this 100 times in training over the past hour. His hands found the manual release for the primary power coupling. It was stuck. He pulled harder, muscles straining. Finally, it gave way with a grinding sound. "Get the backup generators online," he shouted to his team. Manually, just like we practiced. In the weapons bay, Dayan was working in complete darkness. His flashlight had died in the pulse, so he was working by feel alone. He found the manual release for the railgun loading system and pulled it. The mechanism groaned, but moved. One railgun ready. He moved to the next one. On the bridge, Jiwan had pulled out a paper notebook and a mechanical pencil. In the red emergency light, she was doing calculations by hand. Calculating firing solutions without a computer was something she had learned in basic training and never thought she would actually need. Her hand moved quickly across the paper, working out angles and trajectories. Sola was in sick bay when the pulse hit. She had been preparing medical equipment when everything went dark. Now she was working by the light of chemical glow sticks, checking that the manual respirators were working. 3 patients needed them to breathe. She moved from bed to bed, hand-pumping air into their lungs until the backup power could be restored. All across the human fleet, similar scenes were playing out. Crews working in the dark, using their hands instead of computers, relying on training and desperation. On the Resilience, Commander Yunji's crew was manually venting damaged sections to prevent fires from spreading. On the Wanderer, Captain Taiho's engineers were physically turning massive valve wheels to restart their reactor. The Torvin ships were dark too, but their crews were not moving. They sat in the darkness, waiting for their automated systems to reboot. Their ships were controlled by quantum computers that would restart themselves when the electromagnetic interference faded. It never occurred to them to have manual backups. Why would it? Their technology was superior. Machines were more reliable than biological hands. 2 minutes passed. On the Defiant, Hyen got the backup generator running. Lights flickered back on across the ship. The bridge consoles started to glow, but most of them were still dead, their circuits fried by the pulse. "Life support is online," Hyen reported through the newly working intercom. "Working on weapons and engines now." 3 minutes. Jiwan finished her calculations and started entering them into the one tactical console that had survived the pulse. It was an old model, mostly mechanical, that everyone had wanted to replace years ago. Now it was the only thing keeping them in the fight. 4 minutes. Across the fleet, 12 human ships were still completely dark. Their crews were working desperately, but something had gone wrong. Manual systems had failed, or the damage was too severe, or they simply needed more time. Time they didn't have. On the bridge of the Torvin flagship, the Admiral sat in his command chair, waiting. His ship's systems were beginning automated recovery. Warning lights blinked on across his consoles. In 3 more minutes, his weapons would be online again. Then he would destroy every human ship in range. The Primitives had tried something clever, but it had only delayed their death. 5 minutes. The Defiant's main engines came back online with a shuddering roar. Minho felt the vibration through the deck plates. They had power. They had maneuvering. Now they just needed weapons. Doyan was still in the weapons bay, manually loading railgun rounds. Each round weighed 200 pounds. In normal gravity, he would need a mechanical loader. But the gravity was still weak from the power loss, so he could move them himself. His arms burned with effort, but he kept going. Load, lock, move to the next gun. Load, lock, move to the next gun. 6 minutes. Warning alarms started sounding on Torvin ships across the sector. Their automated systems were coming back online faster than expected. Quantum computers were more resilient than the humans had hoped. On the Torvin flagship, weapon systems showed 60% operational. "Captain," Jiwan said urgently on the Defiant, "I'm picking up activity on the Torvin ships. They're coming back online. How long do we have?" Minho asked. 2 minutes. Maybe less. Minho activated the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Defiant. Weapons free in 90 seconds. If you can shoot, shoot. If you can't, ram them." 7 minutes. 28 human ships reported weapons online. 12 were still dark. The Wanderer was one of them. In the darkness of that ship, Taiho's crew was working with raw desperation. Their main reactor refused to restart. The chief engineer made a decision that should have gotten him court-martialed. He bypassed every safety system and did a cold start, something that could cause the reactor to explode that the reactor caught. Power flooded through the Wanderer systems. Lights blazed on. Taiho nearly collapsed with relief. 7 minutes, 30 seconds. The Torvin Admiral's weapons came online. He saw the human ships on his sensors, many of them moving now, getting into firing positions. He smiled with his scaled lips. "Target the nearest human ships. Fire when ready." Nothing happened. His weapons officer looked confused. "Sir, the targeting computer is still rebooting. We can't aim the weapons yet." The Admiral's smile disappeared. "Then aim them manually." "Sir, we don't have manual controls. Everything is automated." 7 minutes, 40 seconds. On the Defiant, Doyan reported all weapons ready. Jiwan had firing solutions entered. Hyen had every system running at maximum power. Minho looked at his crew, at the people who had made the impossible happen in less than 8 minutes. "Remember Earth," he said quietly. Then louder, into the fleet channel. "All ships, fire everything." The human fleet opened fire at point-blank range. Railgun rounds, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through Torvin shields that were still starting up. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not solid metal traveling at incredible velocity. Round after round tore through armor plating designed to withstand. Plasma blasts, but never tested against old-fashioned kinetic weapons. Missiles launched from human ships, dozens of them, hundreds of them. Simple chemical rockets with explosive warheads, the kind of weapons that galactic species had stopped using centuries ago. They slammed into Torvin vessels whose point defense systems were still offline. Plasma torpedoes, humanity's one modern weapon system, cooked their way through Torvin hulls. The alien ships couldn't evade because their maneuvering systems were still rebooting. They couldn't return fire because their weapons needed their targeting computers. They could only sit and take the punishment. The Torvin flagship took 17 railgun hits in the first 10 seconds. Armor cracked and split. Atmosphere vented into space. The Admiral's bridge shook so violently that he was thrown from his chair. "Return fire." He screamed. "Destroy them." But his crew couldn't. Their weapons were online, but the targeting systems needed another 30 seconds. And in a space battle, 30 seconds might as well be 30 years. The Wanderer, finally back online, fired every weapon it had. Captain Taiho watched grimly as his missiles found their targets. His ship had been seconds from death. Now he was dealing death to the enemy who had trapped them here. 8 minutes. The electromagnetic storm began to fade. Torvin systems completed their automated recovery. Quantum computers came back online. Targeting systems activated. The massive warships began to turn, to bring their superior weapons to bear. Too late. The human fleet had used their 8 minutes well. 70 Torvin ships were destroyed or crippled. Another 100 were damaged and venting atmosphere. The perfect formation the Torvin Admiral had arranged was broken. Ships scattered in confused dot, and the human ships, those old, primitive vessels with their mechanical backups and manual controls, were moving with purpose. They had targets. They had working weapons. And they had spent 8 minutes of hell earning the right to fight back. Mino watched the tactical display as G1 updated it with new data. The Torvin were recovering, yes. They were bringing their superior weapons online. But the battle had changed. It was no longer 300 against 40. The numbers were evening out. All ships, Minho said calmly. Engage at will. Make every shot count. The real battle was just beginning. The battle lasted another 3 hours. 3 hours of desperate fighting, of human ships darting between asteroids, while Torvin vessels tried to bring their superior weapons to bear. But the advantage had shifted. The Torvin formation was broken, their admiral's careful strategy ruined by 8 minutes of helplessness. When it finally ended, the human fleet had lost 18 ships. 22 remained, all of them damaged, all of them running on emergency power and determination. But of the 300 Torvin vessels that had surrounded them, only 43 survived. The rest were debris, floating in the asteroid field. Minho stood on the bridge of the Defiant, barely able to believe what he was seeing on the tactical display. They had won. Against every logical calculation, against overwhelming odds, humanity had won. Captain, Jiwan said quietly, I'm picking up distress signals. Lots of them. Torvin survivors. Escape pods and damaged ship sections drifting through the debris. Enemy soldiers who had expected easy victory and found only death. Minho's first instinct was to ignore them. They had tried to destroy humanity. Let them face the consequences. But then Sola spoke from the doorway of the bridge. We need to recover them. Everyone turned to look at her. The medical officer looked exhausted. She had been working in sick bay for hours, treating wounded crew members, watching some of them die despite her best efforts. Blood stained her uniform. Are you serious? Doyon asked. They were trying to kill us an hour ago. I know, Sola said. But we're not them. We're human. And humans don't leave people to die in space, even enemies. She looked at Minho. It's who we are, Captain. It's what makes us different. Minho was quiet for a long moment. He thought about all the things that made humanity unique in the galaxy. Not their technology, which was inferior. Not their physical strength, which was average. But their stubborn refusal to become monsters, even when fighting monsters. Send recovery teams, he ordered. Our wounded first, then theirs. The next few hours were strange. Human crew members in spacesuits moved through debris fields, pulling Torvin survivors from escape pods. The aliens were confused and frightened. Some expected to be executed. Instead, they were brought to human sick bays and treated for their injuries. In the Defiance medical bay, Sola worked on a Torvin officer whose leg had been crushed in the battle. The alien watched her with those strange glowing eyes, unable to understand why the primitive human was trying to save his life. Why? The Torvin officer asked in broken human language. We would not do this for you? Sola didn't look up from her work. I know. That's the difference between us. The Torvin admiral was found in the wreckage of his flagship. His command crew had died in the final assault, but he had survived in a protected section of the ship. When human Marines brought him aboard the Defiant, he walked with dignity despite being a prisoner. His scaled face showed no emotion. Minho met him in the conference room. No guards, no weapons. Just two military commanders talking after a battle. The admiral sat across the table, his glowing blue eyes studying the human captain. You should be dead, the admiral said. By every calculation, every tactical analysis, you should have been destroyed. How did you do it? Minho leaned back in his chair. You relied on your technology, being superior. We relied on each other. That is not an answer. It's the only answer that matters, Minho said. Your ships are better than ours. Your weapons are more advanced. Your computers are faster. But when everything stopped working, your crews sat and waited for the machines to fix it. Our crews fixed it themselves. The Torvan admiral was quiet for a long moment. We were taught that you humans were primitive, that your refusal to fully automate your systems was a sign of technological backwardness. I see now that we were wrong. Your primitiveness is your strength. We prefer to call it adaptability. Minho said dryly. News of the Battle of Sector 7 spread through the galaxy at quantum transmission speeds. Within hours, every major species knew that humanity had defeated the Torvan Collective's finest fleet. The reactions were mixed. The Varathian Empire, which had fled the battle before it began, sent a diplomatic message. They claimed they had only retreated to get reinforcements and were pleased to see their human allies had prevailed. Nobody believed them, but the message was noted. The Quellan Unity, the telepathic species that had surrendered, requested a meeting with human leadership. They wanted to understand how a species without telepathy had coordinated so effectively in battle. They wanted to renew their alliance, this time with more equal terms. Smaller species, the ones that had been conquered or ignored by the major powers, sent messages of congratulation. Some offered alliance. Some just wanted to know if the stories were true. Had the primitives really beaten the Torvan? But not all the news was good. 3 days after the battle, Jiwan brought Minho a decoded intelligence report. She had intercepted it from a damaged Torvan communication relay floating in the debris field. Captain, you need to read this, she said, her face pale. Minho read the report twice to make sure he understood it. The Torvan Collective was not a unified government. It was the military arm of something larger, something called the Directive Council. The Council controlled dozens of species, hundreds of worlds, and they had just learned that one of their fleets had been destroyed by primitives. The Council was not pleased. They were mobilizing a second fleet. This one would be different. 3,000 ships, not 300. And they would be prepared for human tactics. They would have electromagnetic shielding, manual backup systems, and strategies designed to counter everything humanity had done at Sector 7. How long do we have? Minho asked. 6 months, Jiwan said. Maybe 7. Minho looked out the window of his ready room at the damaged ships of the human fleet. 22 vessels, most of them barely functional, against 3,000. The math was even worse than before, but he didn't feel defeated. Instead, he felt something strange. Hope. Because 6 months was enough time. Time to repair ships. Time to share what they had learned. Time to prepare. Get me a channel to all human command, he said, and send copies of our battle data to every captain who fought here. I want them training other crews in what we learned. Over the next weeks, the human fleet became a training ground. Hyen traveled from ship to ship, showing engineering teams how to install manual override systems. Diane taught weapons officers to aim railguns without computer assistance. Jiwan shared her paper calculations, teaching people how to do tactical math by hand. Sola did something different. She started a program to train medical staff to treat alien species. If humanity was going to survive, they would need allies. And allies needed to know that humans could be trusted, even with their former enemies' lives. The Torvan Admiral watched all of this from his quarters on the Defiant. He was a prisoner, but he was treated well. Minho visited him regularly, and they talked about tactics and strategy. Slowly, grudgingly, the Admiral began to respect these primitive humans. Your council is mobilizing a fleet to destroy us, Minho said during one visit. 3,000 ships, the Admiral nodded. I know. I expected as much. Will you help us fight them? The Torvan Admiral looked shocked. You would trust me to fight beside you against my own people? You're not fighting beside us, Minho said. "You're a prisoner, but I would value your tactical advice. You know how the Council thinks. You know their strategies. Why would I help you defeat my own species?" Minho met the alien's glowing eyes. "Because they sent you here to die. They gave you 300 ships and told you to destroy primitives. They didn't give you intelligence about our capabilities. They didn't prepare you for adaptive tactics. They treated you and your crews as expendable. Is that an organization worth dying for?" The Admiral was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "What do you want to know?" 2 months after the battle, the first new allies arrived. A species called the Bryn, small beings who had been conquered by the Torvin decades ago. They sent 5 ships and asked to learn human tactics. Minho welcomed them. Then came the Tolvar, reptilian beings from a cold world who had fought 3 wars against the Directive Council and lost all of them. They sent 12 ships. Then the Kesh, the Morven, the Dreel, small species, forgotten species, conquered species. They all came to learn from the humans who had done the impossible. Minho stood on the observation deck of the Defiant, watching the growing fleet. Human ships working alongside alien vessels. Crews learning from each other. It wasn't an empire. It wasn't a collective. It was something new. "What are we calling this?" Jiwan asked, standing beside him. Minho thought for a moment. "The Free Coalition. No one rules. No one is abandoned. Everyone fights together. The Council won't like that." "Good," Minho said. "Let them be afraid for once." In 6 months, the Directive Council's fleet would arrive. 3,000 ships against maybe 200. The odds were still terrible, but they were better than they had been. And humanity had learned something important at Sector 7. You don't need superior technology to win. You need superior determination. And no species in the galaxy was more determined than humans who had decided not to quit. 6 months passed quickly. The human fleet grew from 22 damaged ships to 140 functional vessels. Not all of them were human. The Free Coalition included 40 different species now, all of them training together, learning from each other, preparing for what was coming. But numbers alone would not save them. 3,000 Directive Council ships were on their way. Even with allies, even with new tactics, the Coalition was outnumbered 15 to 1. They needed something more. They needed the galaxy to understand what they were fighting for. The Galactic Council had not met in 3 years. The last time, they had gathered to discuss trade regulations and mining rights. Boring politics that meant nothing to most people. But now, after the Battle of Sector 7, after humanity's impossible victory, the Council was meeting again. And for the first time in galactic history, humanity had been invited to speak. The Council met on Axis Prime, a massive space station that belonged to no single species. The Grand Assembly Chamber could hold representatives from 200 different species, and today it was full. Everyone wanted to see the primitives who had beaten the Torvin. Minho arrived with his crew, Jiwan Hyan Sola, and Dayan walked beside him through the corridors of Axis Prime. Protocol officers tried to give them ceremonial robes to wear, fancy clothes that would make them look more civilized. Minho refused. He wore his uniform, the same one he had worn during the battle. It still had stains on it that wouldn't come out. "You should wear the robes," the protocol officer insisted. "It is customary for council speakers." "I'm not here to follow customs," Minho said. "I'm here to speak the truth." The assembly chamber was enormous. Seats rose in circular tiers around a central speaking platform. Representatives from 200 species filled those seats, all of them watching as Minho and his crew entered. The room went quiet. Minho recognized some of the species. The Vorathian delegation sat in the upper tiers, their energy forms glowing softly. The Quellan Unity occupied a section to the left, their telepathic network allowing them to act as one mind. And there, in the lower tiers, sat the Torvin delegation. They looked at Mino with cold hatred. A neutral moderator, a being made entirely of light, floated above the speaking platform. The council recognizes Captain Mino of the human species, representing the Free Coalition. You may speak. Minho walked to the platform. He didn't have prepared notes. He didn't have a fancy speech written by diplomats. He just had the truth, and that would have to be enough. 6 months ago, he began, my fleet was trapped in Sector 7. We were surrounded by 300 Torvin warships. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. By every logical calculation, we should have surrendered or died. The chamber was silent. Every being in the room knew this story, but they wanted to hear it from the human who had lived it. The Torvin admiral offered us surrender terms, Mino continued. He told us we were primitives. He said our technology was backward, our tactics outdated, our species insignificant. He was right about some of that. Our technology is not as advanced as yours. Our ships are older. Our weapons are simpler. The Torvin delegation shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But the admiral was wrong about one thing, Mino said. He thought being primitive was a weakness. We proved it was a strength. When our plan disabled every ship in the sector, Torvin crews sat in the darkness and waited for their computers to fix the problem. Human crews fixed it themselves, with their hands, with manual controls that most of you stopped using centuries ago. A murmur ran through the chamber. Some species were nodding. Others looked confused. That is humanity's advantage, Mino said. Not technology, not superior weapons. Adaptability, resilience. The refusal to quit even when quitting is the logical choice. A Vorathian representative stood up. Captain Mino, your victory was impressive. But you had advantages. The asteroid field. The element of surprise. These factors will not be present in future battles. You're right, Mino said. Which is why we're not relying on tactics alone. We're building something different. The Free Coalition is not an empire that conquers. It's not a collective that assimilates. It's a partnership of equals, where every species contributes what they're best at. A Quellan representative spoke, their telepathic voice echoing in everyone's mind. What can primitive species contribute that advanced species cannot? Minho smiled. Everything you've forgotten. You Quellans have telepathy. You can coordinate perfectly in battle. But what happens when your telepathic network is jammed? You panic. You've forgotten how to communicate with words and gestures. The Quellan delegation looked uncomfortable. And you Vorathians, Mino continued, looking at the glowing beings in the upper tiers. You can manipulate energy itself. Your weapons can destroy planets. But your entire civilization depends on energy fields that can be disrupted. What happens when those fields fail? You've forgotten how to use physical tools. A Torvin representative stood up, his scales gleaming in the chamber lights. You speak of our weaknesses, human, but you ignore your own. Your species is short-lived. You are physically weak. You have no special abilities. You are, as we said, primitive. Yes, Minho agreed. We are all of those things. But we survive anyway. Do you know why? Because humans don't quit. We've survived ice ages without fur or blubber. We've survived diseases that killed millions. We've fought wars with sticks and stones and rebuilt from ashes. Every human advancement came from facing something impossible and refusing to accept defeat. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the species who had dismissed humanity were listening. The Directive Council is sending 3,000 ships to destroy us, Minho said. They think overwhelming force will solve their problem. But they're wrong. Force alone has never defeated humanity. The more you push us, the harder we push back. The more desperate our situation becomes, the more creative we get. Pretty words, the Torvin representative said. But words will not stop 3,000 warships. No, Minho said. But partnership will. That's why I'm here. The Free Coalition is open to any species willing to join us. Not as subjects, not as vassals, but as equals. We share our tactical knowledge. We share our adaptive training. And in return, you share your strengths with us. Why would we join you? A small species from the back of the chamber asked. The Directive Council will crush you. Joining you means making them our enemy too. They're already your enemy, Minho said. Every species in this chamber has either been conquered by the Directive, threatened by them, or ignored by them. You think you're safe because you're not their current target. But if they destroy humanity, who do you think they'll come for next? That caused a reaction. Representatives began talking among themselves, their various languages creating a cacophony of sound. Minho raised his voice. The Council operates on fear and overwhelming force. They think they can conquer anyone because no one has successfully resisted them. But we have, and we'll do it again. Not alone, but together. That's what the Free Coalition offers. A chance to stand together instead of falling one by one. What are your terms? Asked a reptilian species Minho didn't recognize. No terms, Minho said. Just one rule. No member is abandoned, no matter how desperate the situation. If you join the coalition, we fight for you. And you fight for us. That's it. The Torvin representative laughed harshly. A children's pact. The Directive will break you easily. Maybe, Minho said. Or maybe we'll do to their 3,000 ships what we did to your 300. Place your bets accordingly. The Torvin delegation stood up as one and walked out of the chamber. The moderator tried to call them back, but they ignored him. The door sealed behind them with a final sound. Minho watched them go. Anyone else want to leave? If you think the Directive is your friend, go now. No one moved. Good, Minho said. Because we have work to do. The Coalition fleet will engage the Directive forces in 6 weeks at the Meridian Line. Any species that wants to join us, send your ships there. We'll teach you what we know. And together, we'll show the galaxy what happens when free people decide to fight back. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species were arguing against joining. Others were already sending messages to their home worlds. A few representatives approached the platform, wanting to speak with Minho directly. But in the back of the chamber, 40 small species that no one usually paid attention to were making a different kind of noise. They were cheering. The conquered, the forgotten, the ignored species were standing and applauding. Not because they thought humanity would win, but because someone had finally given them hope. Got by the time Minho left Axis Prime, 40 species had officially joined the Free Coalition. Another 30 were considering it. The Varathian Empire had sent a private message saying they would think about it. Even the Quellan Unity had expressed interest. On the shuttle back to the Defiant, Jiwan asked the question everyone was thinking. Do you really think we can beat 3,000 ships? Minho looked out the window at the stars. I don't know, but I know we're going to try. And I know that every species in the galaxy is watching. If we win, everything changes. If we lose, at least we showed them it was possible to fight back. That's not very reassuring, Doyan muttered. No, Minho agreed. But it's honest. And right now, honesty is all we have. The Defiant was waiting for them, along with 190 other coalition ships. More were coming every day. The Meridian Line was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare for the biggest battle in galactic history. 6 weeks to prove that humanity was more than just lucky primitives who won one fight. 6 weeks to show the galaxy what free people could do when they refused to quit. The Meridian Line was not a physical place. It was a region of space where 3 major trade routes intersected, making it strategically valuable to everyone. If the Directive Council controlled it, they would control commerce across a quarter of the galaxy. If the Free Coalition held it, they would prove that resistance was possible. The Coalition fleet arrived 2 weeks early. 217 ships from 43 different species, all of them preparing for the battle that would decide everything. They were still outnumbered badly, but they had something the Directive didn't expect: unity, built on trust rather than fear. Minho stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the organized chaos of the fleet preparing for battle. Human ships worked alongside Bryn vessels, sharing engineering techniques. Tolver crews trained with Kesh warriors, learning each other's combat styles. The former Torvin admiral, now an official coalition advisor, was teaching captains how the Directive thought and fought. "How are we doing?" Minho asked Jiwan. She looked up from her tactical console, which was now a mix of human technology and improvements from a dozen other species. Better than expected. The Bring helped us upgrade our sensor systems. The Tolvar shared their shield technology. We're still outgunned, but we're not as vulnerable as we were at Sector 7. And the training? Every ship has manual override systems now, Hyan reported from engineering. Every crew knows how to reboot without computers. We've also installed the Kesh backup reactors, which are basically impossible to disable with electromagnetic pulses. Doyan spoke from weapons. We've got new ammunition, too. The Driel showed us how to manufacture armor-piercing rounds that can punch through Directive shields. Not as good as their weapons, but better than what we had. Sola had news from medical. I've trained staff on every ship to treat 43 different species. We've also set up hospital ships with mixed crews. If someone gets wounded, it doesn't matter what species they are. We can help them. It was exactly what Minho had hoped for. The Coalition wasn't just ships flying together. It was people working together, learning from each other, becoming stronger through cooperation. That was humanity's real contribution to the galaxy, showing that different species could be stronger together than apart. The Directive fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 3 weeks after the Coalition took position. 3,000 warships, perfectly organized in geometric formations. Their arrival was meant to intimidate, to make resistance seem hopeless. And it worked. Minho felt his stomach tighten when he saw them on the tactical display. "That's a lot of ships," Doyan said quietly. "Yes," Minho agreed. "It is." A transmission came through from the Directive flagship. The Council's chosen commander appeared on screen, a being Minho had never seen before. It looked vaguely insectoid, with multiple eyes and mandibles that clicked when it spoke. "Human vessels and collaborators," the Directive commander said. "You are ordered to disperse immediately. This region is now under Directive control. Resistance will result in your complete destruction." Minho took a breath. "This is Captain Minho of the Free Coalition. The Meridian Line is neutral space. We're not leaving. And if you try to take it by force, we'll stop you." The Directive commander's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "You stopped a single poorly prepared fleet. We are not unprepared. We have studied your tactics. We have electromagnetic shielding, manual backup systems, and strategies designed specifically to counter your primitive methods. You cannot win." "Maybe," Minho said, "but we're going to make you earn it." The Directive commander seemed about to respond, but then something strange happened. Another transmission cut in, this one from inside the Directive fleet itself. A ship broke formation and moved toward the Coalition line. "What's happening?" Jiwan asked, checking her sensors. "Unknown ship transmitting on our frequency," the communications officer reported. They're requesting permission to join the coalition. Minho stared at the screen. A directive ship was defecting. Then another one. Then 3 more. Within minutes, 17 ships had broken from the directive formation and were moving to join the coalition. "This is Captain Vresh of the directive vessel Crimson Dawn," a new voice said. "We've been watching what you're building. We want to be part of it. We're tired of serving the Council through fear." The directive commander's face appeared again, filled with rage. "Traitors, you will all be destroyed for this betrayal." "Then destroy us," Vresh responded calmly. "We'd rather die free than live as slaves." More ships began breaking formation. Not many, just a few dozen out of 3,000. But each one represented a crack in the directive's absolute control. Each one proved that the coalition's message was spreading. "All defecting vessels, join the formation," Minho ordered. "Welcome to the coalition." The directive commander cut transmission without another word. The massive fleet began moving forward in attack formation. This was it. The battle that would decide everything. "All ships," Minho said on the coalition channel. "Remember what we've learned. Remember what we're fighting for. Not conquest, not power, but the right to be free. Make them pay for every meter of space. Make them remember this day." The fleets collided. It was nothing like Sector 7. This was a full-scale fleet engagement. 3,000 ships against 234. The directive had learned from their mistakes. They didn't cluster their ships. They didn't rely solely on automation. They fought smart and careful, using their superior numbers to surround and destroy coalition vessels one at a time. But the coalition had learned too. When directive ships tried to isolate human vessels, Bryn ships would swarm in to provide covering fire. When enemy forces focused on the smaller species, Polvar battleships would draw fire to their stronger shields. Every species used their strengths to cover another species' weaknesses. The Defiant took heavy damage in the first hour. A directive dreadnought targeted them specifically, trying to destroy the human flagship and break coalition morale. Railgun fire tore through their shields. Hull breaches vented atmosphere on 3 decks. "Engineering, I need shields," Minho shouted as the ship shook around him. "Working on it." Hyen's voice came back, strained. "We've got Kesh backup reactors routing power to the Tolvar shield generators. Give me 2 minutes." They didn't have 2 minutes. The directive dreadnought was lining up for another shot, one that would split the Defiant in half. Minho watched it happen in slow motion on the tactical display, knowing there was nothing he could do. And a Bryn vessel, tiny compared to the dreadnought, flew directly into the enemy's firing line. The shot that should have destroyed the Defiant instead hit the Bryn ship, tearing it apart. No. Jiwan shouted. "Minh felt sick. That Bryn crew had just sacrificed themselves to save the Defiant. He didn't even know the captain's name. But they had believed in the coalition enough to die for it. "Captain," communications reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Bryn ship before it was destroyed. They said to remember the pact. No one is abandoned." That hit Minho harder than any weapon. The Bryn crew had died believing humanity would remember them, that their sacrifice meant something, and he would make sure it did. "All ships," Minho said, his voice hard. "The Bryn vessel Starlight just gave their lives for the coalition. Make their sacrifice count. Target that dreadnought. Concentrated fire. 17 ships focused on the directive dreadnought. Human railguns, Tolvar energy beams, Kesh missiles, and weapons from a dozen other species all hit at once. The dreadnought's shields failed. Its armor cracked. Atmosphere vented in explosive bursts. The ship went dark. It wouldn't bring the Bryn crew back. But it was something. The battle raged for 6 hours. Ships on both sides were destroyed or crippled. The space around the Meridian Line became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. The Coalition was losing ships faster than the Directive, but they were making the enemy pay for every victory. Then something unexpected happened. A new fleet arrived. Not reinforcements for the Directive, but ships from the Varathian Empire. 50 massive vessels with their energy weapons blazing. "This is High Commander Vareth of the Varathian Fleet," a transmission announced. "We have decided to join the Free Coalition. We will not stand by while the Directive crushes freedom." Behind the Varathians came the Quellan Unity, another 40 ships, their telepathic crews coordinating perfectly with the Coalition's more chaotic communication style. Then came smaller fleets from species Minho had barely heard of. Everyone who had been watching, waiting to see if the Coalition could survive, suddenly decided to join the fight. The Directive Commander's face appeared on screen again. And for the first time, Minho saw something other than confidence there. He saw fear. "You cannot win," the Directive Commander said, but his voice was uncertain. "We still outnumber you." "Numbers aren't everything," Minho said. "You taught us that." The Coalition fleet, now over 400 strong with the new arrivals, pressed their attack. The Directive formation began to break. Ships that had been fighting confidently were now retreating. The Council's perfect strategy was falling apart because they had never faced an enemy that refused to quit. No matter the cost. By the time the battle ended 12 hours later, the Directive fleet was in full retreat. They had lost over 1,000 ships. The Coalition had lost 93, including the Bryn vessel Starlight that had saved the Defiant. Minho sat in his captain's chair, exhausted beyond words. Around him, his crew looked the same. They had won, but the price had been terrible. "Captain," Jiwan said quietly, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. 17 more species want to join the Coalition. The Directive is recalling their remaining fleets. They're not surrendering, but they're pulling back." "How many ships did we lose?" Minho asked. 93 destroyed, 147 damaged, 2,812 crew members killed. Jiwan's voice was heavy, but over 30,000 survived because of the medical procedures Sola taught everyone. Minho stood up slowly. His body ached from hours of commanding during combat. "Send recovery teams for survivors, ours and theirs, and prepare a memorial service for every crew member we lost. All of them. Every species." Over the following weeks, the galaxy changed. The Free Coalition grew to include over 100 species. The Directive Council didn't surrender, but they stopped expanding. For the first time in centuries, their absolute power was challenged. Minho stood on the observation deck of the Defiant one last time before heading to the first official Coalition assembly. He watched the mixed fleet, human ships working alongside vessels from dozens of other species. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, misunderstandings, and conflicts. But they were working together. G1 joined him at the window. "Do you think this will last?" "I don't know," Minho admitted. "But we proved something important. We proved that different species can work together as equals. We proved that technology isn't everything. And we proved that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the odds are terrible. We lost a lot of good people." "I know." Minho thought about the Bryn crew that had saved his ship, about the 93 vessels that would never return home. But they didn't die for nothing. They died showing the galaxy there was another way. That's worth remembering. In the vastness of space, the Free Coalition fleet began moving toward its new headquarters. A permanent station where all member species would meet as equals, making decisions together instead of following the commands of emperors or councils. It wasn't the end of conflict. The Directive would rebuild. Other threats would emerge. But the galaxy had changed.